Good morning and welcome, Mr. Dr. Didicus Jules, Director of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission, Mr. Brian Bogart, Representative of and Country Director of the World Food Program, Caribbean Multicultural Office, Ministers of Government, panelists, participants from around the world, colleagues, media representatives, I welcome you. I welcome you to webinar 1 of a series of webinars which will be hosted by the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and the United Nations World Food Program, Caribbean Multi-Country Office, which will explore how national feeding, and this will be school feeding programs, can be strengthened to serve multiple and interconnected purposes, including enhancing food and nutrition security, contributing to interconnected purposes, tackling obesity and overweight, and changing diets, serving as a catalyst for transforming food systems, and building resilience in times of crisis. This initiative is part of a wider joint effort by the OECS and the WFP to boost knowledge management and exchange experiences across our school feeding programs across the region. There are 4 main objectives of the series, and these will include to facilitate regional and bilateral exchanges on key topics linking school feeding with national food systems, as well as to introduce and to promote initiatives and solutions and best practices with respect to school feeding initiatives and programs for practitioners, which they can adapt and include going forward as context, and to contribute to connecting practices, national authorities, and the work that is being done, especially where knowledge sharing across platforms is concerned around school feeding, and to systemize knowledge and best practices, contributing to policy and programs across our region. I am Sheena Warner-Edwards, and I am the Communications Officer with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and I will be your facilitator today. So first up, we will welcome Dr. Didicus Jules, the Director of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Commission, who will deliver some opening remarks.
Respectfully adopting the protocols already established, colleagues, distinguished partners, friends, good morning. Let me begin by expressing sincere appreciation to the World Food Program for its partnership and leadership in advancing this strategic agenda. At a time when the world is becoming more uncertain, economically, environmentally, geopolitically, the question of how we feed our people and especially how we nourish our children has taken on new urgency. And I want to suggest this morning that school feeding is far more than what we often assume it to be. Too often we think of school feeding simply as a way of ensuring that children who are hungry have something to eat. This is important, deeply important, but it is not the full story. Because school feeding, properly understood, is about something much more fundamental. It is about guaranteeing nutritional protection for every child, especially those who are the most vulnerable. It is also about ensuring that no child's ability to learn is compromised by what they lack in their bodies. It is about protecting the very foundation of cognitive development, health, and human potential. And when we begin to see school feeding through that lens, it changes everything. It forces us to move beyond the idea of simply providing food to thinking more carefully about what food is, how it is prepared, how it is presented, and what it teaches. Because children do not eat nutrients, they eat food. And so it is not enough for meals to be nutritionally adequate. They must also be appealing, attractive, and rooted in the tastes and traditions of our people. There's a dignity in that. There's also a practicality, because if food is unappealing, it will be wasted. And if it is disconnected from what children recognize and enjoy, it will not achieve its purpose. The standards we must set for ourselves must be higher. We must ensure that what we serve is both nutritionally and genuinely enjoyable. That the meals we provide are not something children endure, but something they look forward to. And even that is only part of the transformation we need. Because every meal served in a school should not only nourish the body, it should nourish their understanding. And this is where the evidence we now have becomes very instructive. Through the OECS student census, we ask a simple question of every child across the system. Do you have breakfast every day before school? What we found should give us pause. At the very early primary level, most of the children, about 85 out of every 100, report that they do have breakfast. But even there, a small group already begins the day without that nutrition foundation. As students move into upper primary, the numbers remain generally positive, but the cracks begin to show. More students reporting that they do not eat consistently, and more concern emerging about the quality of food available during the school day. By the time we reach secondary school, the picture changes sharply. At the upper secondary level, as many as 35% of students report they do not have breakfast every day before coming to school. This is not a marginal number, that is a structural signal. And alongside that, students are telling us something else. They are not only concerned about whether they eat, they are concerned about what they eat, about the quality of food, about the environment within which it is served, and about the choices available to them. What that data therefore reveals is not simply a question of hunger. It reveals a deeper issue of readiness to learn. It tells us that school nutrition is not a peripheral concern, it is foundational. And it reinforces the point I made earlier that school feeding must be understood as part of the architecture of learning itself. Because a child who comes to school without breakfast is not just hungry. That child is being cognitively disadvantaged before the first lesson even begins. When we speak about school feeding, therefore, we are speaking about equity. We are speaking about performance. We are speaking about the conditions under which learning is even possible. And if we accept that, then implications follow. Every meal becomes an opportunity not just to feed, but to teach. To help children understand what they are eating, where it comes from, and why it matters. To build what we may call food literacy, to connect the food on their plate to their health, to their culture, to their environment, and to the livelihoods of those who produce it. Imagine a child eating a simple, well-prepared meal of local foods, and understanding that those foods nourish the body, they support local livelihoods, and reflect the richness of Caribbean life. That child is not just being fed, that child is learning deeply and meaningfully. And if we push this idea further, we begin to see that children do not have to remain passive recipients in this process. In many parts of the world, school feeding programs involve children themselves in the preparation and serving of meals. Now, of course, we must proceed with care. Safeguards are essential. But there's something powerful in the idea that children, especially older students, can participate in age-appropriate ways of preparing food. Because when children are involved, something shifts. They begin to develop a respect for food. They begin to understand effort, care, and responsibility. They acquire life skills that remain with them long after they leave school. Even younger children can participate in simple ways, washing fruits, assembling basic items, learning about ingredients. And in doing so, they begin to build a relationship with food that is active rather than passive. And perhaps the most powerful extension of this idea is the connection between school feeding and agriculture. We should not underestimate what it means for a child to plant something, to care for it, watch it grow, and then to eat it. Even at the earliest levels of education, children can be introduced to this experience. A small garden, a few crops, something simple but real. And from that simple act comes a profound understanding that food does not come from a supermarket shelf. It comes from the earth, from labor, from care. And as children grow older, that can be expanded into more structured programs, school gardens, partnerships with local farmers, integration into science and environmental learning. And beyond the school, we can encourage children to take this experience home, to grow something even in the smallest space at home, a pot, a backyard corner, a few herbs, a single plant. Because what we are cultivating is not just agricultural knowledge. We are cultivating a mindset, a culture of production, of self-reliance, of connection to the land. And when we design school feeding in this integrated way, something even more powerful begins to happen. We begin to influence the wider food system. Because if school feeding programs are linked deliberately to local agriculture, they create stable demand for local farmers. They reduce dependence on imported food. They shorten supply chains. They strengthen resilience. In that sense, school feeding becomes not just a social intervention, but an economic strategy, a resilience strategy, a pathway towards food sovereignty. And perhaps most importantly, it becomes a pathway into the household. Because children carry home what they learn. They begin to influence what is cooked, what is valued, what is understood as healthy. They become agents of change within their own families. And so what begins as a meal at school becomes something much larger. It enables a shift in how entire households think about food, nutrition, and sustainability. This is what systems transformation looks like. And that is why, in the context of the Eastern Caribbean, where we face high levels of food import dependence, exposure to global shocks, and the growing burden of non-communicable diseases, we must treat school feeding not as an add-on, but as a central pillar of our development strategy. We are living in a world of volatility and uncertainty, a world in which the old assumptions no longer hold. And in such a world, we cannot afford to approach something as fundamental as food in a fragmented way. We must be deliberate, we must be integrated, we must be strategic. Because ultimately, this is about more than feeding children. It is about shaping a generation that understands how to nourish itself, how to sustain itself, and how to live in balance with its environment. It is about building resilience as securely and equally in our systems as in our people. And if we get this right, we would have done something profoundly important. We will not simply have addressed hunger, we would have strengthened capacity, dignity, and self-reliance. And in a world where increasingly no one is coming to save us, that may be one of the most important investments we can make. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jules. And as his remarks have said and have pointed out, we are cultivating a mindset. Currently, 1 in 3 children are overweight or obese across the entire Caribbean. And therefore, what we have seen is that the consumption of processed foods and unhealthy lifestyles have been the persistent causes of this proliferation of NCDs across our region. We now welcome, therefore, Mr. Brian Bogart, the representative and country director of the World Food Program Caribbean Multi-Country Office, to deliver remarks.
Thank you very much, Gina. And let me start by expressing my gratitude to the OECS and to Director General Jules for his remarks. And I have to confess, I found myself humbled by the eloquence with which he outlined the importance of school meals to children and to our collective social and cultural well-being in the Caribbean. I found it very impressive, and I look forward to speaking with him at our next meeting on this subject and exploring this further. Let me first begin by stating that WFP is proud to join forces with the OECS Commission to launch this new webinar series of 4 episodes. This one entitled School Feeding and National School Food Systems in the Eastern Caribbean, Opportunities for Transformation. This initiative forms part of a wider joint effort with the OECS to promote knowledge exchange, to bridge barriers, to identify practical solutions, and to build a strong community of practice, connecting governments, partners, and practitioners across sectors. Across this series, we will explore opportunities to enhance food and nutrition security and to transform food systems by strengthening and rethinking school feeding programs. This series brings together country representatives, practitioners, and experts from within and beyond the Eastern Caribbean region to share evidence, experience, and innovation. I would like to warmly welcome all participants today and to thank the representatives from Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and Belize, as well as colleagues from the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and the Caribbean Public Health Agency for joining us. Thank you all for contributing to this first session, which focuses on the role of school feeding programs and policies in boosting food and nutrition security, including in times of crisis. Let me briefly set the scene. National school feeding programs in the Eastern Caribbean currently reach over 40,000 children, providing daily meals across public pre-primary, primary, and secondary schools. Across the wider English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean, this number rises to more than 3 million school children, making school feeding programs among the largest existing social safety nets in the region. In most countries, these programs began 40 to 50 years ago. Today, they are well established with national budgets covering more than 98% of program costs, a powerful indicator of sustained political commitment. At the same time, significant challenges remain. High costs, fragile national food systems, operational inefficiencies, and exposure to economic and climate-related shocks continue to limit countries' abilities to maximize the full impact of these programs. This is bringing us to why we have this series and the importance of these webinars. Global evidence and practice clearly shows that school feeding programs can be a catalyst for food systems transformation. Evidence has long demonstrated that the strong value for money of school feeding, with returns on investment estimated between $7 and $35 for every dollar invested, benefits extend beyond education, positively impacting health, nutrition, agriculture, and social protection. Around the world, governments increasingly view school meals as strategic, long-term investments, reflected in rising domestic spending. By 2022, global annual expenditure on school meals reached $48 billion, an increase of $5 billion over just 2 years. Here in the Caribbean region, the urgency is clear. Today, 1 in 3 children in the Caribbean is overweight or obese, and the rates of childhood obesity have risen steadily over the past 2 decades. In a context where processed foods and unhealthy lifestyles are key drivers of this trend, stronger, nutrition-sensitive school feeding programs can be a true game changer, helping to reverse these patterns and drive positive change from schools to communities and households. At the same time, national food systems across the region face persistent challenges. These include declining productivity, limited innovation, high dependence on imports, and growing vulnerability to climate shocks. These constraints limit farmers' ability to access institutional markets, including school feeding programs. By strengthening linkages between schools and local producers, including youth and women farmers, we can unlock new and more stable markets, help schools diversify diets, build resilient school food environments, and ultimately transform local food systems. It is these opportunities, challenges, and solutions that we'll explore together throughout this webinar series. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussions ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bogart. And as highlighted, this has been a problem for us over the last 2 decades, where we've seen a proliferation of childhood obesity across the region and identified, and this is via evidence, from across the globe. And then, of course, regionally, as it's building, we have seen that, school feeding programs play a major and a pivotal role in terms of transforming this space. And what I would share is that the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, again, with strategic partners working alongside the OECS Commission, the media, the Pan American Health Organization, we have, I would say, implemented a series of programs, behind a series of policies, but also we've implemented a number of campaigns. And these campaign videos, we would want to showcase to you, and we hope that you've seen them, as they have been produced and disseminated across social media channels, across television, so using both traditional and non-traditional media to reach persons where they are at. I will now introduce to you, 2 very short videos that we have done and have placed on social media, done by the HCC and partners. So those are 2, and I have to say we tend to keep them short, especially for the space of social media. And these videos, I would say, have reached millions of persons across our region, so our Caribbean region, but also internationally. And out of our building campaigns, what we have done is formulated a school network. So this mix up of persons who are across the region working on policy, who are working on programs and developing, or in the, I have to say, thought process of developing or hoping to institutionalize school feeding programs across the region. And there are 3 of our country partners who will be presenting today. So you will hear from Grenada, you will also hear from Antigua and Barbuda, and you will also hear from Belize. We have online our Grenada representative, and she will be presenting or answering the question as to how has Grenada designed or transitioned school feeding initiatives that go beyond simple calorie provision to ensure high quality, nutrient dense options for students. And it's a point to note that Grenada has been actually one of the first in the region to delve into the area of looking at the school feeding program, looking at childhood obesity, and how best they can turn around the current epidemic that may be seen across the region. So there are some countries that were leading, and Grenada has been one of those countries. So again, I welcome you to listen. It's not a formal presentation, but definitely a presentation of one with lots of thought-provoking answers.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Pearson Straub. It happened to be a he. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share today. we have been asked to present on the topic, what has been Grenada's experience in terms of transitioning from just providing food, and I want to paraphrase, providing food for children, and provide, as opposed to providing food that is nutritious for our children on a daily basis. To give some brief context to the school feeding program within Grenada, as Dr. Jules would have indicated, our program began in the 1970s, late 70s, and was, should I say, uh, it grew during the revolution, and then of course it eventually took on the that of its own, in the sense that it was very heavily financed by outside sources. We had Petrocarib, and we had other agencies, primarily ones who were financing the school feeding program. Um, the school feeding program became a solely government sponsored program somewhere in 2012 or so. And so we have been really supported financially by government since that time. How have we moved in terms of transitioning from just feeding children to making sure that we are feeding them in terms of nutrition? I think one of the major steps that Grenada took during the period between 2017 and onward, we first of all was able to, with assistance from FAO, develop prescribe menus for our schools. And so, with the assistance of FAO and the Greater Food Nutrition Council, we had a consultant come in to guide us in terms of what were the prescribed menus, and primarily making sure that we are using local produce in those menus. We have, over the last few years, worked with our food producers in terms of the ones who are cooking, the cooking staff within the school system. During the summer programs, during the summer, we make sure that we do training with different groups of cooks, as we call them, throughout that period, so that when they go back within the normal school system, they will implement those menus. Has it been a full rollout in terms of them following consistently? No. One of the issues that we've had over the years is that we've not had the type of the necessary human resource in terms of staff to monitor, to make sure that happens from time to time, that they fall back into their old patterns. But it is really important that we have continued to work with them over the summer vacation time during that period, and we continue to train. The other area that we have worked with in terms of transition in the program is we have, after 2018, or previous to 2018, we primarily, most of our meat, and we provide mostly two meats to the school feeding program, that is chicken and fish. And of course, obviously, we're in the Caribbean, so the fish is local. But primarily, when it came to the chicken, before 2017, 2018, we were almost 100% using chicken that was imported. However, especially after COVID, we are woke to the reality that we needed to seriously make sure that we had our local producers being involved in terms of servicing and providing the school feeding program. Apart from the fact that we know it is more nutritious for our children, we also had to be cognizant of the fact that it was important for us to support producers. So while we were looking at making sure we were producing nutritious and giving our children nutritious meat that we believe was locally produced and under conditions that we were satisfied that they did not have hormones being given to the meat and those things like that. It was important for us to also recognize that we had to support. And so after COVID, that was something that was really awoken in us in terms of the program, and we have increased significantly from that almost zero to where we are using our local producers. Not holistically, we still use imported meat, but we are in the process of making sure that we put a program together so that we would increase even further And hopefully we would get to the place where, if not totally, that at least more than half of our chicken that we use in our school kitchens come from local producers. The other area that we have transitioned in is the area of making sure that we use our school gardens in a more direct and intentional way. Now, we've always had things like 4-H and those things, those type of activities within the school system. But what we have done is that, well, we've done two things. One, as of 2022, we have been doing two things. So the school feeding program supplies the schools with meat, dry goods, and that is in kind. So we from a central ministry, we would procure the meat for the different school kitchens, and we will also procure dry goods. So we're talking about the peas, rice, and those things like that. So it's dry goods as well as meat, and that this is delivered to the schools. Of course, when it gets there, the schools will store it, and we take care. They take care of that from that end, and of course, cook it for the children. But what we have done since 2022 is that we've also reintroduced, which was something that happened years before, but was cut for more than a decade or so. Reintroduced giving the schools a voucher, monies that they would have, and the intention was, and the intention is to use that. So apart from the dry goods and the chicken, the meat, the fish, and the chicken given to the schools, we also send money. Now, the money that we send is not significant amounts of money. We basically give it at a ratio of $1.10 per child. So if a school is feeding 500 children, you understand that they will multiply, and that's the amount that we give. Previous to that, when there was a voucher program, we would subtract the amount that we send in meat and dry good from that total, and then that is what the money that we'll get. But as of 2022, we, of course, with our policymakers, the agreement was that all of the monies, basically the $1.10 per child, will go to the school for two main purposes: the purchasing of vegetables and the purchase of ground provision, to be able to supplement and to use starches that are more wholesome as opposed to the rice and the pastas and all those things like that. We were trying to achieve, in this sense, again, a few things. One, making sure that the students were being fed based on the menus that were produced by together with FAO, that they were being fed based according to those menus. We were also making sure that we had the situation where we will be helping the school in giving the children things that are attractive. We had in the past that we would have a central agency bringing vegetables to the schools, but what most of the time happened is that by the time the vegetables got there, lettuce would be wilted, tomatoes would be almost spoiled, and it was just wasting. And of course, by the time you cut that up and you give the children, it's not attractive. And so the voucher, the money that is sent, is primarily being used for that, to make sure that they purchase vegetables and the ground provision and that's where we get to the next level here now, from local producers. Because what we wanted to do is to also get the producers, get the schools to be able to support local farmers. And when the local farmers now see that there's a ready market, they will produce even more. It's the very same thing that we're trying to do with having deliberately getting into our school gardens functioning again. The very similar thing that we're trying to do, because what we are encouraging is that even as the 4-H club or whoever club is planting in school, the school feeding program, the principals or whoever is supposed to purchase the vegetables, purchase the chicken from the children, and from this 4-H or the case might be, purchase from them, and then they will now use that monies to now get more seedlings, get more hatchlings, and it continues. So it's supposed to, the intention is to feed into the program, feeding the children. The children get an understanding of what it is to be the business of agriculture. They see and understand what it is to produce something, and money coming from it, and they're getting now to be able to produce and to see how it was done. So primarily, these are the main areas that we have we have been transitioning in Grenada, and we thank you. I thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mr. Strood. And Mr. Strood is the Director of Student Support Services Unit in Grenada. And of course, one thing highlighted has been the importance of the clubs. So the 4-H Club. I know here in Barbados, the 4-H Club leads on agricultural initiatives, and that's throughout the schools as well as in the workplace. So we have some workplace wellness activities happening, and these clubs have been very, very, very prominent. In terms of, I know Mr. Pearson highlighted one of our gaps, and that is the incorporation of fruit and vegetables in our school meals. And it's interesting to note that in the pre-questions, we had over 50% of our registrants who actually gave a substantive answer and said that one thing that was missing from the school meals is vegetables and fruits. So this is one of those areas that I think, again, there are so many barriers, I guess, but through these webinars, what we will be doing is sharing many ideas, and so around that, so we can secure these fruits and vegetables for our school feeding programs. But we've heard of things popping up, such as predator larceny, being of concern at the schools. We've also heard here from Mr. Pearson, we've heard about the perishability. So these are things that we will have to take into consideration as we discuss here, as well as we are looking for ideas as well presented from you, the public, and so to help us, strengthen our school feeding programs. So up next, we have Antigua and Barbuda, and we have Ms. Denicia Gilead Bishop, who is the Child Care and Protection Officer. So another key sector in the space, and she will be presenting on Antigua and Barbuda's situation and how they have effectively enforced the new CARICOM-CARFA standards to restrict high-fat, sugar, and salt foods in our school cafeterias and vending spaces.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Edwards, for your kind words of introduction. Greetings, everyone. So in Antigua and Barbuda, we are faced with the persistent issue of childhood obesity. Unfortunately, we are facing a non-communicable disease crisis that begins in our children's lunch bags. The Ministry of Health, as recent as last year, 2025, conducted multi-sectoral workshops aimed at adopting the PAHO technical recommendations. These guidelines acted as a roadmap of sorts to restricting high-fat, sugar, and salt foods. It is my humble opinion, in this present climate of obesity, food-related illnesses, and chronic diseases stemming from lifestyle choices, including how and what we eat, it is high time for us to move from voluntary participation to mandatory involvement. And the stronger nutritional standards for schools framework is a great place to begin. This policy will not only outline what can be served or sold on the school compound, but it would also regulate what external vendors can sell and also what the National School Meal Program serves. Just to share a bit of a personal experience, my son is enrolled at a private institution, and as recent as last week at a parent-teacher conference, my son's teacher noted that students who stuck to the school's first break fruit and water only regimen are more attentive and possess stronger immune resilience than those who do not. However, inconsistent enforcement among some parents and staff at this school demonstrate how voluntary guidelines can easily fail. This highlights the urgent need for a mandatory nationwide policy to ensure all stakeholders are held accountable to the same standards. Such a framework would guarantee that a child's health is protected by consistent rules rather than left to individual choice. Now, in order to implement these standards, the following considerations are being made. Restricting HFSS foods. Implementing the PAHO nutrition profile model to identify and ultimately phase out ultra-processed snacks and sugar-sweetened beverages from school compounds, both public and private. Now, while the legal framework for This remains the Education Act of 2008, specifically Section 172 regarding vendors on the school premises. The new policy introduces specific mandatory standards that vendors must meet in order to maintain their vending status. So essentially, we are adopting a licensing system where school vendors must commit to selling healthy options like fruit, water, local juices in order to operate on or near school campuses. This ensures that no matter where students turn during their breaks, the convenient option is also the healthy option. Now we have some curriculum integration. Utilizing the HFLE, food and nutrition, and the agricultural science curricula to teach children why we eat, what we eat, and how to make healthier food choices. We can't just tell our children, eat this. We have to show them why. And this approach uses classes that they already attend to build a food IQ of sorts. In our HFLE classes and our food and nutrition classes, we're teaching how sugar affects energy levels and long-term health. In our agricultural science classes, we're teaching our students how growing their own food is important and also how to become self-sufficient. Now we have the farm to table link. The Antigua and Barbuda and FAO Country Report 2025-2026 highlights how the farm to table link combats childhood obesity while supporting local farmers who provide fresh, non-processed produce for the National School Meals Program. By sourcing directly from local vendors and gardens, which serve as living laboratories where our children can experiment and learn. The program cuts out the middleman and it enhances food self-sufficiency, and it also ensures that meals are prepared with fresh ingredients and packed with nutrients. Furthermore, research suggests that children who are involved in growing fruits and vegetables are more prone to eating them and enjoying them more. This transition from imported preserved goods to internal supplies eliminates the need for detrimental preservation techniques, and it also fosters a generation of students who are engaged in their own nutrition and well-being. Let's briefly discuss barriers or limitations, if you will. Now, with all plans and ideas and the introduction of new initiatives, total buy-in is not guaranteed. As stated before, without national policy and an overall framework outlining expectations, there will continue to be vendors outside of school gates who are selling the exact same unhealthy snacks that have been banned on the compounds. We also have cultural resistance. In our society, we have unfortunately adopted some unhealthy Western habits. And healthy food choices are seen as a chore and sugary snacks as a reward. However, compliance is important to halt the rise of childhood obesity and diabetes, protecting every student's right to grow up healthy. By strictly upholding these standards, school helps students rediscover local flavors while providing the stable energy necessary for classroom focus and academic success. Permit me to share a brief but relevant professional experience. For the past 3 years, I have had a diabetic client who is often hospitalized due to her high glucose readings. This client often sneaks sugary snacks and drinks at home, and at times she purchases them from vendors at school, only to be transported to the hospital hours later with dangerously high readings. This is truly unfortunate. The reality is that food costs have increased globally. And one of the biggest barriers in healthy eating that I have encountered is the ridiculously high cost of healthy foods in the supermarket. This continues to be an issue due to the rising costs of importation. We do have some lessons that we have learned. Policy fails without buy-in, and public education is important. Cafeteria staff and vendors through this initiative will be educated and trained on how to prepare low sodium, high flavor meals using fresh local ingredients rather than MSG filled seasonings and overly processed ingredients. Now, in my capacity as a social worker, I see families every day who want to do better. But a bag of salty snacks is about $1, $1.50, while a small bowl of fruit is about $5 upwards. It is truly an unfortunate reality. As a mother, I recognize that food is medicine, yet I also know the sinking feeling of realizing a pack of noodles is more affordable than fresh carrots or bell peppers. However, the fact remains, healthy eating must be a right for every child. This daily financial struggle will make public sensitization and training futile if families are still unable to afford healthier options. This is where this initiative and government subsidies are important. Admittedly, the government actively supports local agriculture in a plethora of ways in an attempt to decrease local food costs. The National School Meals Program Cabinet Decision 2016 removed the $1 per day fee for students. Our reality is that some children go to school without eating from home. Through the National School Meals Program, children are afforded hot meals daily at no charge, ensuring that while a child's home circumstances may be uncertain, their access to nourishment that is required to learn, grow, and thrive remains an absolute and unbreakable guarantee. Our government is working at maintaining this initiative and keeping the National School Meals Program free and high quality for all public primary school students, ensuring that the program remains accessible, removes financial barriers to nutrition, and making healthy meals a standard part of our public education experience. We have expanded our efforts recently to our sister island in Barbuda. In summary, we have the CAPA standards. We have the political will. Now we need the financial empathy. As a social worker, I see the cost of illness. As a mother, I see the value of health. In our little Antigua and Barbuda, we're ensuring with this initiative that all children are given a fair chance to grow up properly and healthy.
Thank you, Denicia. And that was very powerful remarks. What we have shared again and repeatedly is that cost, and this has come out in this presentation, cost has been a major factor with respect to what organizations, individuals, companies, governments as well have been able to source, with respect to food chain supplies, food availability, and so forth. And what has come out as well from our participants is that cost has been a barrier, and they are describing a structural food systems problem. And in that we see import dependency, which we've spoken about, especially for our Caribbean region. We've seen trade policy issues arise as we've seen lack of local supply chains, through disruption. And all of these has contributed to the overall problem that we are seeing. Another good point that was raised was the dietary habits formed in early childhood and how important that is to get persons, especially young children, involved in planting and preparing their foods to, secure or cement that kind of culture as we look to change our culture to achieve a better program through our school feeding programs. So we are now welcome, again, another perspective from Belize, and this is through Miss Kathleen John, who is the coordinator of the National Healthy Start Feeding Program in the Ministry of Education. And for us at HCC, we work very, very closely with Kathleen over the last 2-3 years with respect to formalizing, implementing their school nutrition policy. So you will hear quite a lot from Belize, where there's quite a lot too of cultural influence in the diet of our children.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share Belize's experience. Today, I'm going to be giving a short overview of Belize's National Healthy Start Feeding Program, which is a new program. This was established in 2023 and is still being expanded. Currently, the program incorporates 78 schools and 15,000 students, serving about 11% of primary school students and 30% of high school students. And expansion will continue next year. The National Healthy Start Feeding Program follows the homegrown school feeding model, which has a multi-component approach, which includes healthy meals from locally sourced ingredients, a focus on nutrition education for cooks, staff, and students, infrastructure improvements to ensure quality and safe food, and community involvement, particularly with connections to small farmers. Our program is a bit unique because it is completely decentralized. Every school operates its own kitchen and is responsible for preparing one healthy meal each day. The government of Belize provides 3 Belize dollars, which is $1.50 US, per child per school day, and these funds are sent directly to each school and managed by the principal at that school. Procurement is done by each school in their own community. This program has a social protection function in Belize. First, the meals are free for the students. And second, the funds also cover the salaries and Social Security contribution of the school cooks, who are majority women, and this enables them to enter into the formal workforce. In 2025, the Cabinet approved our first school food and nutrition policy, which now serves as the roadmap for strengthening the program and its continued expansion. Beyond providing meals, the National Healthy Start Feeding Program works to improve the entire school environment. I would like to highlight a few of our nutrition-sensitive activities that support this objective. Improving quality and diversity of meals is a key focus for the program. We have healthy menus for primary school and high school levels following the PAHO nutrition standards. In addition, we try to do yearly cooks training sessions. These are in person and the cooks do hands-on cooking during the sessions. This last school year, the cooks received gastronomy training from one of Belize's top chefs. The training focused on incorporating local underutilized produce to help diversify meals while improving the flavor. We also had a contest this year for students to submit and vote for their favorite meal ideas. The winning meals were given to a nutritionist who then created healthy versions and adapted for school use, and a recipe book was created, which will be distributed to all the schools to use. Shaping the school environment to support healthy choices is another focus. Through a partnership with PAHO, we tested different types of water provision to the students, and we ultimately found that water fountains providing cool water are the best competition to sugar-sweetened beverage, supporting the ongoing goal of getting sugar-sweetened beverages off of school campuses. We have installed 4 water fountains under this project. In addition, through support from UNICEF, we're in the process of developing a list of recommended healthy snacks and beverages to guide what is sold at school snack shops using the CARFA PAHO nutrition standards for school. We are doing a national survey of snack items sold in Belize, and we have also put out a call to producers to submit locally produced items for consideration for recommendation. We also link the feeding program with nutrition education and connection with local farmers. And our school gardens play a vital role here. They're a very important educational tool. Our goal is to eventually get to all of our schools having a school garden. This year saw the installation of 6 brand new school gardens under an FAO project. And this also included hands-on training and garden supplies for 21 schools nationally. And this project got participation from 799 students and 53 teachers, and it was very well received. It was also timed to coincide with the National School Garden Competition, which is run by the Ministry of Agriculture, and many of our participating schools are very excited to be competing. I believe next weekend, the prizes will be given to the winning schools nationally. We are also piloting a market-focused training initiative with small farmers to help boost direct farmer-to-school produce sales. While this is a goal of the program, we have found it difficult to get these communication between the farmers and the schools to boost these sales. So we're now trying a different way to try and increase this direct connection. Together, these efforts are addressing food access, knowledge, preferences, and the school environment, which shapes children's choices. For policy implementation, we have 3 main strategies. First, because of this highly decentralized program, we rely on capacity building for our cooks, principals, and teachers. It's essential. Their understanding and support of the program is a key factor for us. Second, as you might have guessed, partnerships are critical. Most of our activities, such as trainings, gardens, infrastructure improvements, are supported through collaboration with developmental partners. Third, with very limited personnel, we have to be adaptive and creative, especially with monitoring. We use practical approaches such as close communication with principals through WhatsApp groups, electronic submissions of records, and monitoring apps. Despite our progress, we have some key challenges. Financial considerations, as other countries mentioned, are very difficult. The $3 Belize per child per day has not been increased to match rising food prices, which makes it very difficult for schools to source affordable, healthy products. The funds are also only paid on school days, which means there is no pay for cooks over school holidays and breaks. This definitely increases turnover of our cooks. Managing monitoring with a decentralized system and limited personnel is an ongoing challenge, and we are working to strengthen this. From our experience, I'd like to highlight a few key lessons. First, our policy matters. Having a national policy provides structure and direction for the program. It gives the program authority to request changes in the schools that might be unpopular, such as the ban on sugar sweetened beverage sales. It also helps us when dialoguing with partners, as our program objectives are clearly defined. Our principals make or break the school's feeding program. They have the ability to make the program truly shine, and they provide practical, on-the-ground advice and support for the program. We actively seek their feedback. Investing in capacity buildings of principals, cooks, and teachers is vitally important because they are doing the hard work every day of getting those meals to the children. We know healthy environments impact choices. Access and availability of clean drinking water and healthy foods on every school campus are our primary goals. In closing, the heart of the National Healthy Start feeding program is supporting the rights of the children, with the goal of ensuring every child has access to a healthy meal and a school environment that supports their well-being. As our program grows, we return to that central goal for motivation, to remind us that every small positive change we achieve can have a real effect on a child's life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. And as I said, we've worked quite closely with Belize of recent with respect to the school feeding program and their policy. And again, what has been highlighted by Kathleen is that the school cooks have been seen and being utilized as change agents. And that has been very unique and one of the unique lessons learned coming out of Belize, and one that I'm happy she has been able to share here, as we basically experience quite similar things across the region. And many of our school cooks, once trained and engaged, can be very much so beneficiary to our school feeding programs. We will now move on to some highlights, and these are highlights from our online audience. And this will be led by the OECS Commission and the World Food Program. So I welcome, I'm not sure who's presenting, but I'm welcome to the OECS.
Hi, Sheena. Sorry, I couldn't find a mic. Thanks a lot. Yes, we're following with the colleagues at the OECS Commission the Q&A session that the audience is posting online. There are quite a lot of interesting questions, some of which we try to answer on the chat directly. One, for example, was about the supply chain, the school supply chain, basically, and how we can implement more local purchases in school feeding programs. And we are basically responded. We have responded basically that this is a question that will be addressed in the next webinar. There are questions about interest about the role of the private sector as well in the equation, and let me see. The audience that come from comments that come from producers that are sharing their interest in in participating in the school feeding program. So that's quite exciting. And let's see. Perhaps we could share these questions and direct the questions to the panelists for them to have perhaps their opinion on that. Maybe I will say that perhaps the question about efforts in purchasing more locally in order to diversify the diet of children for increased nutritional value of the meals. Perhaps the panelists from Grenada could share a little bit about their experience on that. It's just to discuss with you a little bit about how Grenada is addressing the potential opportunities of sourcing more food locally for a more diverse meal for school children to increase the nutritional value of meals. Thank you very much.
So we do it in two ways. That we are doing it in two ways. One, by using the schools themselves. So we are actively and deliberately getting the school gardens back up in collaboration with the 4-H, and we're actually having the schools purchase from the 4-H clubs. And so we could resuscitate that through the means. But we've also, with the voucher system of sending monies to the schools, one of the mandates is that we are asking the schools to make sure that primarily, of course, we know that the things are on a daily basis, things can be different, but we really do our best to enforce and to ask them to make sure that the monies that are sent are primarily used for vegetables and ground provision, and also that it's purchased from the local farmers. And so having the local farmers, the farmers who are operating close to the school, we have less issue of the produce spoiling, and so by the time it gets to the school, so it's almost straight from the garden directly to the kitchen. So it's a bit more manageable in terms of making sure that the food is attractive to the children, and so that is how we have been able to implement, making sure that we use the more local. And of course, from a policy level, we have it has been something that we have been be very persistent on in increasing our use of local chicken from our local producers, as opposed and lessening the amounts of meat, especially chicken, from outside, from imported. So these are the ways that we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Trude. And again, following on, because we actually have some pre-questions that would have been submitted for our panelists, and then we have a number, there are about 7 or 8 questions. Again, lots of great feedback as well from the audience, but there are a few questions in our chat that we will try to respond to. So what I will do at this point is ask our panelists to turn on their cameras, and we will then proceed with a Q&A session, formal Q&A session. And I actually think that all of you can probably respond to these questions, but I will post it, and then we can see who would have the best response for our audience. So the first question is actually from a nutritionist from Dominica, and she's asking, what policy, financing, and cross-sector governance models enable national school meals programs in OECS countries to deliver nutritious food consistently? Can our panelists speak to the models that have worked and what's held others back? And any of you who may go first, but I know all of you definitely can respond to this.
I just spoke, so I didn't want to speak again. But well, for Grenada, one of the things that we made sure that we did in 2022 was to reinstate the finance to the schools. It gives the schools flexibility to be able to take care of some of the miscellaneous things that we've been speaking about. It's really important, and that's what we saw. We had a centralized distribution of the vegetables. But what happened is that by the time it got to the schools, it was unattractive. Lettuce started to wilt. Tomatoes were spoiled, and on those things like that. Cucumbers, it was just spoilage. And so we had to find another way of doing it. And of course, together with the FAO, we had a program in Grenada referred to as the Zero Hunger. And through Zero Hunger, we were able to look at some of the system, look at the system in a critical way. And it was noted that one of the best ways to make sure that we did that, one, to resuscitate the gardens, the school gardens, and two, it was to make sure that we got the local farmers to produce, to supply the schools with produce. They're close by. We're providing a ready market for them. The more we are able to purchase, then they will be able to produce more. The problem at the time is that the schools didn't have the ready finance to make that happen. And so in 2022, that was the decision. The policy decision was to reinstate, apart from the dry goods and the meat that we give to the schools from central ministry, because just like Belize, every single school in Grenada who has a school feeding cooks on their own. We do not have a centralized cooking program. We don't have central kitchens that we cook and distribute. Every school cooks on its own. And so the idea was that the schools would get that and be able to then purchase and take care of those type of needs, especially the vegetables and ground provision, because we really wanted to diversify as well the type of starches that we were giving the children, and trying to make sure that it was attractive, fresh, and making sure that it was something that they would want to consume. I think I answered, but I hope I did. Yes.
Yes, you definitely did. I'm definitely hearing the models, some models that can be replicated across our region. I'll move now to Ms. Kathleen John, who can build on what you've shared, because there are quite some similarities, again, across the school system in Belize.
Sure. I'd also like to take the opportunity to kind of answer as well a question that was in the chat specifically for Belize, talking about the school cooks. And so our cooks are employed by the schools. So they're not employed through the ministry, they're employed directly by the schools. And as I mentioned, the funds are provided from the ministry. It's only during active school days. So if there's any holidays or breaks, the funds are not sent for the cooks. This is definitely not ideal, but it is what the budget can handle currently. So what we do, we work with the schools to ask them to consider this for their cooks. So if they want to do fundraising during the year so that they can provide a stipend over the holidays, we encourage this. We also keep in mind that in this region, when we look at Belize as part of Central America, Honduras and Guatemala, etc., most of the school feeding programs are actually staffed by volunteer cooks. And we specifically did not follow that model because we feel that the work that the women do is very important, and we want to increase the quality and their capacity to cook healthy and safe meals by investing in the cooks. So we also require not only that they get paid at least minimum wage, and that is up to the discretion of the schools. If they are in an area, for example, that is a tourist area, the schools can offer a higher wage, and the schools also must pay the Social Security contributions of the cooks. We work in different ways to try and make this work. Since cooks are providing one meal per day, but they're there the whole day. We also say to the schools, they can be making and selling healthy snacks, and that helps support the kitchens and provide more funds for the program. But yes, we do take it very seriously, the responsibility to, because these are often women in the community, they're often mothers, grandmothers, or aunts. And not only are they providing meals for the children, they are then going back out to the community and providing meals for their families. So any education we can give them in nutrition and food safety benefits the entire community.
Fantastic. That always comes up. We have women who are definitely playing these key roles in the community. I know how we can incorporate or include them more is always a number one question, even from a farming perspective, because we have quite a lot of female farmers, young farmers. I've just met an ideal, it was about 10 to 12 young people, young females who have gone into farming, and this is in Barbados. And it was very impressive to see, the roles that women play in all of these key sectors, that we would need to engage as well as we go forward in our school feeding programs. I'll also engage Janicia Gillett Bishop, who is again from Antigua and Barbuda, to share her perspective and what policies, what models, are definitely being implemented in Antigua and Barbuda and that can be shared regionally.
So what we have been using in Antigua and Barbuda, as I noted before, is the National School Meals Program. And through the National School Meals Program that is run under the guise of the Ministry of Education, we have hot meals supplied to children daily. It began, I want to say, in 2005, but recently, in about 2016 or so, the $1 fee was taken away. Usually we would pay $1 per day, so it'd be a $5 per week for each child, but now it is free. Hot meals are provided for children. There is also, I think, a breakfast program where children can get hot meals in the morning as well. And there are some schools that for some children of vulnerable standing, they are given some foods to take home as well. It all depends. We also have school gardens, farms that we have our fresh produce being produced on grounds, as well as there are some schools that are equipped with poultry farms. We do also support local farmers. So we have that link, so that farm to table link, as I noted before. And basically, that is, oh, and our cooks are also trained. And we have, now again, we have workshops and stuff like that that help them to, re-up on their skills and expertise in that regard.
Excellent. Yeah, we're seeing all of the similarities again across countries. So this is powerful actually, especially again for Antigua and Barbuda to remove that dollar fee. I mean that is major for the government to agree to do such. For many countries, that is still, I mean, it has been identified as a barrier to some parents, but it is still a case where children will contribute $1 a week to their school meals programs. So it's great to see that we can move to a space where, that barrier is removed and all children will have access to the school meals that is definitely necessary and needed as we go by day to day. At this point, I will welcome Ms. Abigail Caleb, and she is a Senior Technical Officer, Food Security and Nutrition from the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Welcome, Abigail, to the conversation. And she will share an expert, high-level, experience, I would say, from the CARFER perspective.
Thank you very much, Sheena, and good day to everyone. So as we would have heard, the problem of childhood obesity exists within the region, with 1 in every 3 children being affected, making the Caribbean region one of the worst affected by childhood obesity. And why it is of such a concern is because of the linkages to adult and adolescent obesity, which in turn increases the risk for NCDs, which are the leading causes of death and disability within the region, accounting for over 70% of deaths. And when we look at what the critical role that nutrition, including school feeding programs and school meals play in terms of those that may not be balanced and high in fat, sugar, salt, and sodium, or that contain processed foods, we can certainly see why having this webinars such as these and interactions such as these are very important. So at CARFA, we are the sole public health agency within the Caribbean region, and we are mandated to build our member states' capacity so as to prevent disease and promote health and wellness, which would of course include childhood obesity. So in 2017, one of the key initiatives that we would have done in collaboration with CARICOM was to implement the 6-point policy package, which is a regional framework to promote healthier food environments and food security so as to address childhood obesity through joint policy action. And each of the 6 policy areas, when implemented in part or collectively, will do just that. So one of the areas that is quite relevant to this workshop that you would have worked on is policy point 2, which strongly recommends the development of mandatory national nutrition standards for all foods provided and sold in schools and early childhood services. And the reason why this is so critical is because there are still several countries within the region that do not have a school feeding or school nutrition policy or guideline implemented, or countries where it may have been implemented or developed, but the nutrition standards component of it is lacking in terms of the looking at the unhealthy ingredients, fats, trans fats, saturated fats, sugars, sodium, processed foods, etc., which are still allowed within the school environment. And we know that when combined with other challenges within the region, within and outside of the schools, such as not having sufficient vendor enforcement, not having a legally harmonized policy in place to ban the marketing of unhealthy foods to children, that it's quite timely. And even in countries that have had successfully implemented a school feeding or nutrition policy, there still exist challenges. You would have heard from at least two of our panelists, challenges such as limited human resource capacity, limited availability of fresh produce, especially of fruits and vegetables. You heard from Grenada experience. And of course, the regulation of vendors still remain a challenge. But addressing these challenges will enable countries to be able to, our schools to be able to provide consistent, high quality meals and reduce the availability and consumption of unhealthy foods in schools. So the technical recommendations, so CARFA in 2025, in collaboration with PAHO, we developed technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools, which is meant to be that regional guide to or framework to help countries to develop their own national nutrition standards, which should be a critical component within their school feeding and school nutrition policies. And so there are three main aims of these technical recommendations document. One is to create enabling environments in schools. So make schools or rather limit the availability and access of these unhealthy products within the school environment. Second objective is to reduce the consumption and availability of foods and beverages that are high in unhealthy ingredients, which would also include within the school meals program. And the third objective is to promote healthy eating habits among school children that contribute not only to reducing childhood obesity, but also preventing malnutrition in all its forms, under and overnutrition. So recognizing here that a component of nutrition education is also very critical. And these technical recommendations, so in their development, it was a collaborative approach with several consultations with regional experts as well as countries, and it is quite comprehensive. They can be applied to all foods and beverages, whether sold or served in schools, whether cooked or packaged. They can be used to guide recipe development for prepared food items, and it can also be used to determine whether a processed or ultra-processed product is suitable to be sold or served in schools based on the PAHO nutrient profile model. In fact, we have already started implementing training within countries. We would have trained with countries, 5 OECS member states in November and December 2025. We had representatives from ministries of health, education, agriculture, youth, international trade, civil society, and the countries that were trained included Antigua, who you heard from, Dominica, Grenada, also a panelist, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. And countries such as Grenada, Dominica, and St. Lucia, that even though they already had a draft policy document in place, the workshop highlighted areas that could be revised or included based on the CARFA PAHO technical recommendations so as to reduce children's exposure to unhealthy foods within the school environment. And of course, the training was a major support to those countries that did not have a nutrition policy in place. Particularly, we heard from the representative from Antigua and Barbuda that would have spoken about the progress that they would have made from November 2025 to now. One of the key achievements, in my opinion, is that they were able to successfully form a national steering committee. I note that one of the questions in the chat related to how can health and education work collaboratively, effectively. And this is one of the key recommendations because that committee is responsible for overseeing everything school feeding and school nutrition related. So we have health, education, agriculture, social services, civil society at minimum. In some committees comprises youth and student representatives, etc. But we have them meeting and we have them examining what the challenges are, making recommendations based on the evidence, in terms of what would work, and then assisting with the implementation and the monitoring of those interventions. So it's very important to have that committee in place, even while the policy is being developed. Another key highlight I noted from the Antigua experience was their collaboration with another country, Barbados, to learn from their experiences. What are the lessons learned? What are the best practices? And what are resources that can be shared? For those of you that may not be aware, Barbados actually has one of the strongest worded school nutrition policies. It doesn't allow for sugar-sweetened beverages, sports drinks, candies, and local confectionaries to be brought to school or to be sold or served within schools. And it also prohibits the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages within schools. This is primary, secondary, as well as tertiary level education facilities. So leveraging successful strategies from other member states, such as the Barbados experience or even the Trinidad experience in terms of the guidelines to ban sugar-sweetened beverages, that in combination with the strong technical recommendations within the CARFA-PAHO document, it would be a useful guide or resource in terms of helping countries to streamline the process, to aid in the development and the implementation, and also in the monitoring. And also, it certainly would help in terms of reducing duplication of efforts. Because ultimately, as a region, we're working towards some very collective goals. One being we're working towards our SDGs 2030, particularly 2.2, to end all forms of malnutrition by 2030, and SDG 3.4 to reduce the prevalence of NCDs and obesity by 30% by 2030. So in closing, I would just like to reemphasize and strongly recommend that countries, even those that have existing school nutrition policies or school feeding policies and guidelines, that they fully adopt the CARFA-PAHO technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools to help to guide the development of or strengthening national guidance of food providers within schools. And this will prove to be an effective strategy to enhance food and nutrition security, create healthier school environments, as well as ultimately reduce childhood obesity, both within the countries and within the region. All right. Thank you. Sheena?
Thank you, Abigail. We again, powerful expert, comments, examples, and of course, the policies that can be implemented across the region. We want to thank all our panelists again, and we also want to thank our organizers. So the World Food Program and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS Commission. This series of webinars, again, we started quite powerful. I think we covered quite a lot for webinar 1. And therefore, welcome participants who should have gained throughout this webinar, at least a concrete model that you can take back to your various organizations, some tools and resources. Again, all of our panelists are open and are able and available to provide, supporting documentation. And so if you wish to help you with the implementation of, or to begin, because I know some countries are now literally at the very beginning of identifying those programs and policies that they can implement to help shape the environments for our children. So our next webinar, so we have four webinars within this particular series. And our next webinar will speak to school feeding and other national food-based safety nets, highlighting opportunities and barriers for local producers, particularly youth and women. And this will be held on June 16th. So you can add this to your calendars, June 16th, 2026. And we hope to see all of you and your friends. So please spread the word back here again as we continue this very powerful webinar series. So again, thank you for attending today. And I wish you a safe day as you proceed. Well, I would say safe week as you proceed, throughout this week ahead. Thank you.